Welcome to the Point. This week, we continue our conversations with candidates for the open U.S. Senate seat created by the retirement of Senator Debbie Stabenow. Last week, we introduced you to two Democrats facing off in a primary. This week, the first two of four Republicans vying for their party's nomination. In each interview, we asked the candidates about the same general issues as represented by polling as the most important to Michigan voters. Of course, there are myriad other questions and issues we could have discussed with the candidates, but time only allows so many subjects. Further, not all candidates answered the questions in the same period of time, meaning that not all of their responses are included in the televised version of our show. However, their complete interviews can be seen at woodtv.com following this airing. We begin with Republican candidate for U.S. Senate, Dr. Sherry O'Donnell, who is a physician and ordained minister and mission leader. She talks about her views on some of today's hot-button issues. Doctor, let's talk about inflation and the economy. When we look at polls, it is one of the drivers in this election cycle. And we know that even though inflation may not be as high now as it was earlier, prices remain high and inflation still remains too high for the Fed to cut interest rates. If you're a United States Senator, what policies do you advocate, knowing that you alone can't fix it? Do you advocate for to try to curb inflation and strengthen the economy?
So, Rick, I want to answer that in just a minute. First off, I want to thank you and Wood TV for doing this. And I know Mr. Rogers had refused to debate, so thank you for at least doing this. So, to get back to your question, as a small business owner, I can tell you I feel the chokehold right now of the inflation as well, as do most Americans. But we need to stop some of the reckless spending that's going on right now. Between the reckless spending, we're funding wars that we ought not to be. I think also we just keep printing money, and I call it monopoly money. We're printing money, and that just defies some of the very basics of economy and understanding that you don't put more into the market without that dollar devaluing. So we've got to stop that. I also think we need to stop some of the entitlements. You know, right now there are so many entitlements that are out there, and we need to rein that in and get back to a balanced budget. I am the only candidate that had not only signed the no new tax, but I also will counter some of that. So in U.S. Senate, you bet we need to get the inflation under control and live by the budget that every American does.
One of the other hot topics is immigration. We have seen, depending on whose numbers you use, millions over the past 3.5 years. People flood across our southern border. The president has recently signed an executive order that he says will help take care of the problem. Republicans say it's too little too late. Democrats say if Republicans in the Senate would have voted for a bipartisan deal, that would have fixed it. Republicans in the House say that's nonsense because it was never going to pass the House. Whatever the situation is, what do we need to do as a country, and what would you do as a United States Senator about immigration policy?
So, Rick, thanks. I'm so passionate about this because I've been to the border, 5 different points of location, and I can tell you the border looks a whole lot like a refugee camp that I've seen overseas. You may be aware I've been in 35 different countries, and a lot of it has been disaster relief. So when I was down at the border, it looked like a refugee camp. On my website, DocSherry2024.com, I have a 21-point plan that will close that border and will take care of that border crisis. Tom Homan, the former director of ICE underneath Trump, he's endorsed me. When I met Tom, I said, Tom, does this make sense? Does my plan make sense? You've been there, you understand it. He said, Doc, send it to me. If it makes sense, I'll endorse you. If it doesn't, I'll educate you. Well, Tom Homan has done both, but we need to stop the border. I think also I have a very unique understanding of that as a physician. Not only is the fentanyl coming over, but so is disease coming over. The STDs that are coming over, TB, we're seeing an increased rate in TB. The border needs to be closed. We need to empower the Border Patrol services and security people down there to do their job.
Polling suggests that both Democrats and Republicans are fearful about losing our democracy. They're worried about the threat to democracy. Now, as I read through polls, it indicates to me that Republicans are fearful for one reason, Democrats fearful for another. Are you concerned about losing our democracy?
I say we live underneath a republic, and I am concerned. But I'm concerned because the Biden administration currently, he is just absolutely have enough policy in place that is weakening us as a nation, even on an international front, with the different wars that are going on right now. If Trump was in office, I do not believe that that would have happened. And I think there's so many things that are involved right now. It is multifactorial. But do I think that we're losing our republic? I'd have to say I am concerned.
What do you do to change that?
Get the right people in office to begin with, I think, and go back to empowering the United States to be the world leader that we have been. I think going back to and protecting our Constitution. I am a constitutionalist, and what we're seeing even in that is trampling of our constitutional rights. And I think it's ramped up since COVID, but it was before COVID even. So I think we need to go back to those things. And then empowering we the people. I believe our government should be from the bottom up and not top down. And as soon as we get back there, I think that's going to help. We also need to absolutely become energy independent again.
You're a doctor, so you may have a different take on this question than some of the other candidates, which is why I'm glad to ask you. Since Roe versus Wade was overturned, states have taken really divergent paths in where they're going to go. To some states having virtually no controls over abortion and access, and other states having restrictive plans around same. From the federal level, right now you're a U.S. Senator, let's say, and you have to make a decision. Should the federal government be involved in either establishing guarantees for abortion access or limiting certain aspects of abortion? Is that the federal government's job?
So, Rick, first off, it's interesting that none of my opponents will debate on this as well. But let me share with you, as a physician, you're right, I do have a unique process and a unique understanding. Life is precious. And my whole career of 24 years as a physician has been preserving and saving life. But I'm looking forward to the day that no woman is coerced or pressured into having an abortion. 65% of women that have had an abortion said they would not have had that had they had the support. I see those women in my office, Rick, and it still scars their heart. But we also need to hold men accountable, because I'm absolutely convinced, as a physician, it takes two to have a child, and men oftentimes are not held responsible. I think furthermore, the men have a choice in whether that child is saved or not. We need to make insurances available to these women during their prenatal care so that they have the care that they need. We also need to be making the adoption process much more easy, such that the woman that's made the tough decision to carry that pregnancy to term knows that they have a loving family to turn their baby over into the day that that baby's born. But I think the other thing that's super important is to realize, as you said, this has become a state issue. It's not a federal legislation anymore. It has become a state issue. And the states have that right, but I'm looking forward to the day that women aren't coerced into doing that.
So on a federal level, you would be hands-off.
At a federal level, it's been returned back to the states. My personal convictions are regardless of what and how I would legislate.
Globally, and you mentioned this a minute ago, in both Eastern Europe with Ukraine and Russia, in the Middle East with Hamas and Israel, there are two real hotspots. Those aren't the only ones in the world, to be sure, but those are the ones we've been focusing on. And we have been involved in both of those conflicts in some way or another, with financing, with those weapons that they need to fight those wars. Particularly in Israel, it has been a delicate balance for the Biden administration between supporting a historic ally and also trying to balance what some in his party want to see done with Palestinians. What, as a United States Senator, would you advocate for in either one of those situations? Because both of them could become a flashpoint for a larger confrontation at any moment.
And I think you're exactly right. I think we're at the precipice of at that any moment. So let me share to begin with. I've been in both Israel and I've been in Ukraine. When the Ukrainian war broke out, I took a medical team there. The war broke out on February 24th. We were there on ground by March the 1st, literally bombs bursting around us. And then we sent an additional 8 teams to Ukraine at our payer and our cost, not the taxpayer bill. We don't need to be funding the Ukrainian war right now and sending billions of dollars, especially when our border is so open. But more importantly, or as importantly, I stand with Israel. Israel is our only Middle Eastern ally, and we've got to make certain that they have what they need to make certain that Hamas, which is a terrorist group, is not allowed to continue the activity they have. Most recently, last year, when the earthquakes happened in Turkey and Syria, I went to Lebanon, tried to get into Turkey, went into Lebanon, and we were seeing patients that were pulverized by Hamas. There was a lady that was from Israel, and she was so badly beaten and left to die because she went back to her house to see if it was even still salvageable. But Hamas, and that's what people don't understand, Hamas is a terrorist group. That has to be stopped. We cannot allow terrorism around the world. So I would be standing with Israel. Biden's weak response to the Israeli issues and funding it by sending Syria money to go ahead and fund the war has been unacceptable. And as the next U.S. Senator, I will stand with Israel, make certain that our policy is strong again with Israel, and that Israel has our support.
Just to be clear and to follow up on the Ukraine question, without the United States support, many believe that Russia will be able to take over Ukraine. As a United States Senator, would that concern you?
It would concern me, but one of the things that's more concerning is the billions of dollars that is being sent without any accountability and transparency of that dollar. When I was in Ukraine, and the pastor that we worked with said this to me, and Rick, I'll never forget, he kind of slammed the table and said, what you've got to understand about this war is it really didn't begin on February 24th. It's been decades, and it is about freedom, and he slammed the table and said, and it is a hill I'm willing to die on. America needs to wake up and realize that our freedoms are being dismantled very, very rapidly. So do I think that we would need to continue without any accountability of that dollar and the crookedness of Zelensky? I'm sorry, I don't fund what we don't know where that's going to. And that's what personal firsthand experience has shown me, that Zelensky is not to be trusted. He's spending the people's money, and he's not, all that money is not going to fund the war.
As a United States Senator, one of the things that you would no doubt do, pardon me, is champion one of the biggest industries in the state of Michigan, which has forever been the automobile. But that has changed dramatically under the Biden administration with their big push for EVs, and Detroit automakers have put a lot of investment into making those EVs, even though the sales have not been stellar. What would you advocate for as the U.S. Senator from Michigan when it comes to EVs and what we should do with the auto industry in general?
First off, EVs are not sustainable in Michigan, and it is dismantling the United Auto Workers, and it is taking food off of their table. When they do that, we're never going to be free of what's happening now, and not allowed, but it's not sustainable, Rick. So to have that, and first off, we're still making the batteries for that, for the EV. They've got to be plugged in the multiple places. EV in Michigan is nonsense, and we've got to stop that. Furthermore, the government doesn't have a right to shove it down your throat what car you're going to drive. We still are we the people. We have our choices. We have our rights to drive and not drive what we want to. A car that is too expensive for the common person, especially when inflation is so high right now, and we're being told that that's the car we need to drive. And yes, it is crippling the economy in Michigan because, as you said, especially in Michigan, the auto workers have been so important and such a part of our economy.
Former Congressman Justin Amash is an attorney and former member of the Michigan State House. He's one of 4 Republicans running for the party nomination for the United States Senate. Here is how he responded to some of the pressing issues in this year's election. I want to start with something you're familiar with and something that we think is one of the biggest issues for voters this year. It's the economy, it's inflation. And if you believe that part of that is connected to government spending, you have a track record from when you were in the U.S. House of being opposed to a lot of government spending. Tell me what your approach would be if you're elected to the U.S. Senate when it comes to inflation and economy and what can be done.
When I served in the House, I warned about this. I voted against these multi-trillion-dollar, thousands of pages spending bills. I told people at the time that these kinds of bills were going to cause inflation, that you can't just keep pumping money into the economy this way. You can't just keep printing money at the Federal Reserve, having money just pumped into it. And now we see massive inflation rates. People are paying too much. They're being told by the government that everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Everything's good. But we know interest rates are really high when people are dealing with their mortgages, car loans, other types of loans, they're paying too much money, so we have high inflation, high interest rates, and it has a lot to do with this government spending. And I think this is a big difference between me and a lot of the other candidates in this race who have also served in Congress. A few of them have also served. And the difference is when these spending bills came up, I voted no, they voted yes. I think we need to have someone in Congress who's going to be fiscally responsible, someone who's going to represent the people and make sure that we're not spending this kind of money and causing these kinds of economic downturns.
Immigration is on the mind of many people. By and large, it's the southern border, but immigration in general. Is there something that you as a United States Senator would advocate doing in order to make the process at least more trackable or more fair, or what would your approach be?
We need more people at the southern border committing resources to it. So you have to have security down there. You can't have people just flowing in through the southern border without any checks, any balances. Just anyone who wants to come in, come in. When people are American citizens and they come back to this country, they are also checked at the border. They're asked to present some identification. Yet here at the southern border, you have people just flowing in with no checks. So I think you have to get that under control because the American people will not tolerate the talk about immigration reform when you don't do anything about the southern border. And I've been a proponent of immigration reform. I think we have to have immigrants coming to the country, but you can't do that at the same time that the southern border is so open.
One of the things we see in polling, and it is Republicans and Democrats, and I think for very different reasons, but there is concern about our form of government. Call it a republic, call it a democracy, whatever it is. We hear very often democracy is on the ballot this year from both sides, again, for different reasons. Do you believe that? Do you believe that our form of government is somehow in peril?
I think it is, but not for the reasons a lot of other people talk about. Having served in Congress, I've seen how it works. We really do have a system that is somewhat like an oligarchy. I call it an elected rotating oligarchy, but it's an oligarchy nonetheless. There's a few people at the top who make all the decisions, and we're sending members of Congress there who don't have the power to actually represent the people. And so one of the things I've focused on a lot when I served in Congress, and I'm focusing a lot on this campaign, is we have to make sure that our senators, our representatives can actually take votes on legislation, read the bills, offer amendments. Right now, it's a one-size-fits-all sort of, here's a bill, take it or leave it. And if you put a bill in front of me like that, I'm going to say leave it. I don't want to vote yes on a bill that you stick in front of me. It's thousands of pages. I'm not allowed to amend it. I'm not allowed to represent people back home. So that's a big change we have to make. And if we don't make that change, then we don't really have a representative system of government.
Unless you change those people that are currently in power at those highest levels, it's going to be hard to change.
Yeah, you have to change the people in leadership. But the way you change people in leadership is by getting someone into the Senate who will actually stand up to leadership and is willing to take on their own party.
Roe versus Wade, the overturning of sane, was bound to be important in the country, but it has become a major political issue. As it is now, some states have a lot of restrictions about women's health and about access to abortion. And some states have almost no protections at all in that area. As a United States Senator, it wouldn't be your decision alone, but does the federal government have a role in deciding what those rules and regulations look like? Or is it rightly left to the states to have kind of a patchwork of different rules?
So following the Dobbs decision, I believe the primary governance of abortion should be handled at the state level. But that doesn't mean that the federal level should not be involved at all. My opponent, Mike Rogers, says just follow the Michigan Constitution. Well, the Michigan Constitution allows abortion up until birth. And my view is, as a federal representative, a federal senator potentially, is that if something comes up to Congress and it's something that will address an egregious action by the states, then I'm willing to consider that. So we have to have the ability at the federal level to deal with things at the state level that are beyond the pale, that violate people's rights.
This goes back, at least in part, to the first question I asked you about government spending. But this is broader because this deals with global conflict. conflict in Eastern Europe right now and in the Middle East. And the United States has been involved, even though they may have been a little conflicted in both of these conflicts, not knowing exactly how far they want to go or which side that they fully want to support and how they want to do that, how they want to impact those things. What should our role be, first of all, from a policy standpoint? What should we in the United States be doing to insert ourselves? And then the second part of that is, how much investment should we make in it?
The United States should always be available as a mediator. So we should always be diplomatic, available from a diplomatic standpoint to talk to people from different countries, to bring people together. When it comes to resources and weaponry, I think that's a different question. And we are spending way too much money. We're sending money overseas without any checks on it. I believe that when you send money into and weapons into an active conflict, you are becoming a party to that conflict. And you see this right now in Ukraine. You see it also in Gaza, where the United States is spending a lot of money and sending resources and sending weapons. And they are doing it on a continuous basis. And Congress is not really involved, other than to say at the beginning, okay, send the weapons and send the money. I think if we are in these battles long term, then Congress needs to declare war. And if they're not willing to do that, then that should tell you something about the conflict. So put this question in front of Congress. Let the representatives of the people make this decision. It's not just up to the president, and it's not okay for Congress just to say, hey, let's send money overseas and whatever happens, happens.
In this particular circumstance, when I think about what's going on in Ukraine with Russia, and maybe this has happened in the past, I'm just not aware of it, but I find it interesting that the United States is sending weaponry, and certainly a lot of money, but they're putting kind of regulations on what they can do with those weapons. You can't shoot them into Russia proper. First of all, is that something you've seen before? And second of all, is that our role? And if that is our role, then aren't we more involved than we want to say that we are?
Yeah, I think the president is trying to have it both ways, where he tells people we're not at war, and then when it suits him, he says there is a war. And he wants everyone to believe him in both directions. You know, well, when it's not suitable for him, it's not a war. When it is suitable for him, it is, you know, it's the other way around. So my view is we have to make sure that we have checks and balances. Congress has to be involved. When the United States is sending weapons continuously, sending resources continuously into an offensive operations, whether it's Ukraine, Gaza, anywhere in the world, then Congress has to have a say in it. Congress has to put a check in place and know what's going on, because we have to represent the American people. And it's not okay for the president of any party to say, we're just going to keep doing these things and we'll let Ukraine make all the decisions on the ground. That's not okay. You have to either be in or out, and the United States keeps doing this thing where they're sort of in and sort of out, and I think that's very dangerous for the people.
I want to bring everything back to our shores, although it does have an international component to it. Over the course of the past few years, the federal government has been a heavy proponent of going to electric vehicles and getting EVs on the road and putting lots of money in that process, as has the state of Michigan. Because the auto industry is so important to the state of Michigan, what is your concern about putting so many of our economic eggs in a basket that right now, at least, is not capturing the inspiration for a lot of car buyers, or at least not at the percentages that some of the big automakers had projected or hoped?
Yeah, it's a big concern. I think the United States government should not be subsidizing certain types of technologies. I don't think we should be subsidizing EVs. I don't think we should be subsidizing any sort of technologies. We should let the market decide these things. And the American people can decide what kind of vehicles they want to buy, and those are the ones that will be manufactured here in the United States. And we have the best workers in the world. I know we can compete with any country in the world. We don't need these subsidies from the federal government. Let's put the American people back in charge.
The voting for the Michigan primary has already begun, and in 2 weeks on our program, 2 county clerks will talk about all aspects of how voters can cast a ballot and what changes there are in the process. We're back in just a moment. To the point. Next week, two more candidates for the United States Senate to the point.